It's not so much about how long we live right now, but the quality of life. But the same habits that can lead a child to become obese can also lead an adult to become obese. And we are in an epidemic of adulthood obesity in this country. Recent research has revealed even prior to COVID, about 1 in 4 Americans could be diagnosed with a mental illness every year. Since COVID, those numbers have likely doubled. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Preventive Parenting, Session 1 in the Light of Temperance. Now, before we start with this wonderful presentation topic, I do want to give a disclaimer. This is not simply for parents. As you can see by our backdrop, it's also for your young ones as well. And don't think they're too old or too young to understand basic things or even advanced things in physiology and health and lifestyle and wellness, because they're not. Giving an example, I have 6 children, and I have had the privilege of traveling extensively, years after years after years, of going from place to place, sharing the good news of how you can prevent and even reverse chronic disease through healthy lifestyle choices. And my children, to this day, they still pick up on things and say, "Dad, I remember when you said this or this." My daughter, who is in advanced level biology and anatomy and physiology, said, "Dad, I remember you teaching us about the immune system," which is going to be one of our modules as well. So I'm so excited that you've joined us for this summit. I believe it's going to be a tremendous blessing for you, and I want to encourage you to set goals for yourself, set goals for your family. Children, set goals for your parents. If you realize there are things that need to be done in your household that maybe are not being done, encourage your parents, because in the Bible it says, "And a child shall lead them," and sometimes that even has to happen with healthy lifestyle choices. So today we're going to be talking about a subject that is very near and dear to my heart, because it's really all pervading if we're looking for good health. It is essential in the exercise of every healthy habit, believe it or not, because it has to deal with each one. And that's the concept of temperance. You might ask, well, what is temperance? I haven't heard that word very often. Well, it is kind of an archaic word, but it is a very important word, because there's no other new replacement word in the English language that has the same meaning. It doesn't mean the same thing as self-control. It doesn't mean the same thing as moderation, although it does have some aspects of those two in it as well. To understand what temperance is, we need to go to the Bible, because the biblical definition of temperance is what we're looking for. The subject matter we're going to be presenting is Bible-based, and I believe the Bible is the absolute standard of truth. Human research and speculation goes here and goes there, and sometimes disagrees with the Word of God, but I believe the Bible stands unchallenged as the ultimate source of truth. So let's understand temperance from a biblical perspective. The definition of temperance basically is choosing wisely how to use the good, because there are good choices to make, are there not? And totally refusing those things that are harmful, totally refusing the bad. Where do we get that from? Well, Isaiah 7:15, we find that Christ, in this prophecy of Emmanuel, would learn how to choose the good and refuse the evil. That's temperance. We find in Galatians 5:24 that temperance is actually a gift of God. It doesn't come naturally to us. The carnal nature is at enmity against temperance. Why is that? Well, it has to do with opposing temptations and desires and appetites that potentially could come in conflict with healthy decisions. And how do we do that? It's only by the grace of God, those gifts of God through the Holy Spirit, that we can exercise temperance, and we can refuse those bad things, even use the good things in moderation. 2 Peter 1:6 reveals that knowledge must come first. In Peter's ladder, so to speak, we find that we add to our knowledge temperance. So we are going to be giving knowledge during this summit. We hope that you take this knowledge and you ask God, "Lord, please give me that gift of temperance so that I can utilize that knowledge right, so that I can put off those bad habits in my life, and I can take hold of those good things in moderation." This is the definition of biblical temperance. And this definition has been formulated throughout biblical history. we find from the very beginning, temperance was in place. In Genesis 2:16 through 17, it reads, "And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, Of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day thou shalt eat thereof thou shalt surely die." So right here we have an example of temperance, using moderately those things that were available to mankind, right? Every tree that we could freely eat from, and yet avoiding the things that God had said, that's not healthy, that's not good. This is against my will for your life, okay? That's temperance right there. It's interesting to note that longevity was quite different in the beginning than now. As you can see here from this chart, Adam lived to be almost 1,000 years old. I'm rounding up, but he died at the ripe old age of 930. Going down further on, we see a downward trend up until Mahalalel at 895, but something happened here. And this actually gives us an insight into the concept of, well, I'm born with certain genetics, so I'm going to die from this, or this, or this, or this. Or I'm only going to live as long as my father did. Or I can't expect to outlive my ancestors because I've got worse genetics than they do. They've passed down all their mutations and defects to me. Well, that line of reasoning doesn't hold water with the biblical record here. Because what we find is, even though Adam lived to be 930 years old, which arguably he had the most perfect genetics of any created man, yet we come down and we see that Jared, at 962 years of age, surpassed Adam by 32 years. And he was quite a bit down the line, down the lineage of Seth. We call it the godly line of Seth. We also know that Enoch, who was a very godly man, he rose up and decided he was going to walk with God after the birth of his son, and he walked with God in righteousness, and God took him, we told. So he doesn't have an end of his longevity. He's still alive today. And look at his son. This is a testimony to the influence of a godly parent, a godly father, in this case especially, because Enoch raised Methuselah until he was taken to heaven, but he set such an example that Methuselah became the longest lived man in recorded history. Died at the ripe old age of 969. Lamech, he was put to rest, I believe, right before the flood as an act of mercy. He didn't have to go through the flood, that whole experience. But Noah even lived to be 950 years of age, even on the other side of the flood where the environment was not as conducive to health. And we could see a rapid decline in longevity after this. But what about us today? We're way down the line, genetically speaking. We have a lot of mutations, and we can't expect to live on this earth unless Christ comes back and does something else about it. We can't expect to live to this amount of time. We know that we have an eternity to live with Christ, but our lifetimes here are very short, maybe up to 120 years. There may be a couple people who have lived longer than that in recent history. But you know what? It's not so much about how long we live right now, but the quality of life, and especially for our children. Wouldn't you like to see your children strong and healthy, free from disease, whether that be physical or mental? Wouldn't you like to be, as adults, strong and healthy and free from disease? Wouldn't you like those around you to be strong and healthy and free from disease? Well, unfortunately, that's not the case. In the Western world, and in particular in the United States, which seems to be the hot spot of chronic disease, we have some pretty foreboding statistics, and they're getting worse year after year. According to recent research, 25% of Americans will die from heart disease, 40% will develop cancer, and among those, about 20% will die from cancer. 50% will be obese by the year 2025. That's a projection. 27% are pre-diabetic as of 2012. And about 130,000 die each year from stroke. Now, that's not all, because I mentioned that health is not just about our physical bodies, but it's also about our mental health, our mental cognitive abilities, and freedom from depression and anxiety and other mental illness. Well, we are in an epidemic of mental disease, of mental health. And recent research has revealed, even prior to COVID, about 1 in 4 Americans could be diagnosed with a mental illness every year. Since COVID, those numbers have likely doubled, okay? I recently asked a family practice doctor, what do you think the number of your patients are with mental illness now, a percentage? He said probably about 50%, at least with anxiety and depression. So COVID greatly worsened mental health. We already had a tremendous epidemic of poor quality of mental health, but now it's gotten even worse. Here's another concept to look at, and that's childhood obesity. It's not simply the adults who are overweight and obese, but we see a growing trend in childhood. And we can see, even though changes have happened at various times, the trend is upward, and that's not a good thing. Some age groups even up to 20% obesity in childhood. It shouldn't be. Children should be healthy, should be outside exercising, should be being able to play at recess and spend time with their friends, but oftentimes they're put inside and kept away from the outdoor air, from the fresh air, and from the other health benefits of going outside, like the sunshine. But the same habits that can lead a child to become obese can also lead an adult to become obese. And we are in an epidemic of adulthood obesity in this country. It's absolutely astounding. But it wasn't always that way. Back in 1985, the Centers for Disease Control put together something they called the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System. And what this was consisted of inquiries to all the states, asking them, what is your current level of this, various health factors. One of them was obesity levels as a percentage in their state. And what we're about to do is to go through and look and see how these things have changed over time. In the map we see behind us, you can notice the key down below. As it changed from white to blue, we see that states started to participate in this program. As the blue darkens, we're going to see an increase. If that is going to take place, I won't let the cat out of the bag just yet. And then if it worsens even more, we'll see a change over to yellow. And if continued worsening of obesity prevalence occurs, we're going to see a change from red to dark red. And that leaves off at greater than 30% obesity. Do you think that's going to happen? Do you think that we're going to see in just a short amount of time a great increase in obesity? Well, let's check it out. I'm going to go 5 years at a time, and then I'll comment on each one. Just 5 years, we see that a number of states did start to participate, but what else did we see? We saw a change from the lighter blue, which was representing less than 10%, to 10 to 15% in more than half the country, just in 5 years. Let's go another 5 years and see what happens. 93, 94. We're shot a little bit. Let's go back to 95. What do we see happen here? We saw that we went to the next category here of 15 to 19%. Do you see a trend? 5 more years to the year 2000. What just happened? We're up in the next category now. Half of the country is now 20 to 24% obese. Let's go 5 more years. And the same trend continues. We see an increase into the next level here of 25 to 29% in about half of the country. Let's go 5 more years. And here we are. 2010 was the last year that the CDC started collecting data in this way, and all other subsequent maps that look at obesity prevalence cannot be compared to these. Maybe they got a little bit discouraged. But when this was published, and these actual PowerPoints were presented, probably in Washington, D.C. somewhere, the researchers said this is the worst epidemic we have ever seen in this country. They went on to project, this is where that projection came from in the earlier slide, that by the year 2025, 1 out of every 2 individuals in America, adults, will be obese. And we are on that track, believe it or not, to this day. Very little success has come about in remediating that epidemic. But I'm here to tell you today that there are things that we can do, very logical things and very simple things we can do that can help us to achieve better health and potentially to ward off things like obesity and potentially even childhood obesity for our children. But to do that, we have to gain some knowledge. And I like to look at research. We're going to look at a lot of research throughout all the sessions in this presentation series. But I also like to study history because history can tell us a lot. The rise, the decline, and the fall of nations, a lot of times health is actually playing a role. And this is one such. We'll go to ancient Egypt, first of all, case study. This queen here, and by the way, this may not look like a queen, but it is a queen. You may think, well, that's a pharaoh. She has a beard, right? This is Queen Hatshepsut. She is the only recorded Egyptian pharaoh that was a woman. And according to history, she decided she was at some point going to steal the throne from her stepson. She donned a fake beard. She deposed her stepson and said, I am now pharaoh, which could only be a man. So she had to mimic being a man. She obviously had some difficulty, socially speaking. Researchers have looked at her mummified remains. They found them. And they were able to run her through these imaging studies and actually realize what she died from, what diseases she had. This is what they found. She had problems with her teeth. She had diabetes. She died at the age of 50 because of cancer. Went on to say she was balding. She had hormonal issues, obviously, because of that. She was a little bit overweight. Her face was strong, and she had a problem with her back. Went on to say she had many health problems. Many health problems. Now, but yet this queen not only had all of these health problems, but she also had the opportunity to be provided with the best health care that the world had to offer. You see, the Egyptian system of medicine was very advanced. They had cardiologists and nephrologists. Their embalming techniques are still a wonder to the scientific world today. And yet, this lady was not alone because her peers, the other affluent Egyptians, also suffered from some of these very same diseases: heart disease, stroke, cancer, diabetes, and obesity. And the average age of death was anywhere from 50 to 60 years. This is not a good thing. With the best health care that money had to offer, and yet we see some of these things are the same diseases that adults die from in a country that has the best health care, or at least the most spending per capita on health care of any developed nation, being the United States. Let's take a look at what they were doing. What was the affluent Egyptian required to do? Well, they didn't have to do a lot of manual labor. So their existence was kind of indoors. They'd spend a lot of time indoors, and we're going to find out how detrimental that can be to our health in a later module. They were sedentary. They didn't have to work hard. And oftentimes they utilized an unhealthy diet. They ate the king's delicacies, which the Bible tells us are not the best in terms of their ability to provide for our good health. But there was another group of people during this time that were also Egyptian, but they were not privy to the privileges of affluent Egyptian society. You see, these were the commoners, and they were out working hard in the sunshine and the fresh air. But unfortunately, they were not practicing the concept of temperance because they were coming down with infectious diseases, osteoarthritis from overwork, and their average age of death was under 30 years. They did not live very long at all. They had these beneficial health habits, some of them, but they exercised too much. They didn't use the good in moderation. We find conditions like cardiovascular disease are greatly reduced by just adequate vitamin E levels, which comes from sun. It's known as the sunshine vitamin. We also find that cancer risk is reduced greatly by sunlight exposure. One study found that moderate sunlight exposure decreased colon cancer risk by 50 to 80%. And vitamin D can obviously stop a lot of other cancer cells from developing in leukemia and lymphoma cell lines, breast cancer, and even the dread malignant melanoma. Melanoma is thought to be the skin cancer that's caused by sun exposure. But that's a misnomer. That's a misconception. You see, adequate sunlight exposure can help prevent melanoma from developing. It's the sunburns, especially early on in life, that can predispose or increase the risk of malignant melanoma development later on in life. So there again, usage of that which is good in moderation. We see that in exercise. The common Egyptians overworked, and largely it's probably not their fault. But the sunlight aspect as well. If you want to avoid risk of cancer, use the sun in moderation. There was one more lifestyle factor that scientists and archaeologists have found Egyptians partook in that was to their great detriment in terms of their health and longevity, especially in the commoners. It had to do with something that was comprised of a wild yeast, which, hey, that sounds kind of good. Also was unfiltered. That sounds like a good thing. We find that in a lot of health foods, right? But guess what? It was 3 to 5% alcohol. This is known as Egyptian beer. And a lot of times, the common Egyptian was paid or given rations of beer. Some sources record up to 6 liters per day of this. And obviously, there was rampant alcoholism, chronic liver disease, liver cirrhosis, and that was a big cause of death among common Egyptians. This intemperance in the use of that which is harmful. Now, they were not alone. Even the affluent Egyptian, even the priest class and pharaohs, they considered Egyptian beer to be health promoting. So if we look at the Ebers Papyrus, which was really a guideline of how to practice medicine in ancient Egypt, we find the number one prescription, whether it be combined with something or a standalone, was Egyptian beer. They thought it was a cure-all, but what happened? It actually caused death because it was an alcoholic beverage. Well, some would say, doesn't modern research seem to indicate that drinking alcohol is good for us? Let's go back to those studies. In fact, the very first study that even hinted about the benefits of alcohol in reducing the risk of cardiovascular disease had this to say: "This, however, does not justify the recommendation of alcohol for prevention purposes." Why did they say this? They realized that alcohol could decrease the stickiness of platelets, and that could in turn perhaps reduce the risk of a heart attack. But they also realized that alcohol is dangerous. It leads to all types of chronic disease and social disturbances, and that's why they said, now don't even think that you should prescribe alcohol as a good thing. But guess who took this and ran with it? The alcoholic beverage industry. And a lot of research is promoted by moneyed interest. So we do have a lot of research that says, oh yeah, wine is good for the heart. It's great for you. But the statistics will show otherwise. It turns out worldwide yearly alcohol use results, according to the World Health Organization, in about 1.8 million deaths. That's every year, 1.8 million deaths because of alcohol use. And alcohol consumption can cause over 60 different types of diseases and disabilities. Well, some might ask, what did Paul say? Didn't he encourage Timothy to drink a little wine for his stomach's sake and off infirmities? We need to understand, though, that the biblical use of the word wine referred to not just fermented wine, but also unfermented wine, also the grape juice. Remember the new wine? That is the grape juice. Now, if we look scientifically at the physiology of the assumption that alcoholic wine is good for the stomach, it doesn't make sense. Research reveals a little under 2 glasses of red wine increases the duration of GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disorder, or heartburn, by 17 times compared with water. That's 17x. That's not 17%. That's a tremendous increase. Also, consuming less than 1 full glass of wine increased the risk of stomach cancer by 36% compared to non-drinkers. So even a little bit of wine is not good. We know that wine is, according to the Bible, a mocker. All right, and strong drink is raging, and whosoever is deceived thereby is not wise. If we want to be wise and healthy, we need to exercise the use of temperance and say, no, I don't want to take that. I'd rather use grape juice in moderation or eat the grape itself. Studies have revealed grapes and grape juice, the resveratrol, the phytochemical found in those foods, will help us to have less sticky platelets. So you don't have to have the ethanol to get the benefit of grapes. You can avoid the wine, avoid the bad, and choose the good in moderation. Okay? Now, why is that important to us as Christians? Paul counsels us in 1 Corinthians 9:25, and every man that striveth for the mastery is temperate in all things. Are we striving for the mastery in life? Are we striving for the mastery over temptation and over evil and over sin? I hope so, because we're admonished to do that in passage after passage in the Word, to overcome and to not do this in our own strength because we can't. Remember, temperance is a gift of God. But if we ask Him for that gift, we must believe that we have received it by faith and go forth walking in faith and walking in the Spirit. We're told when we do that, we will not fulfill the desires of the flesh, those temptations that draw us into ill health. We will be strong in choosing that which is right, in walking in the light of temperance. I want to go to a different group of people that were alive during the time of the Egyptians that I had mentioned, but yet they had much different health outcomes. These are the Hebrews. We find that Joseph lived to be about 110 years old in the book of Exodus 50:26. It's also recorded in Egyptian manuscripts that the ideal age to die is 110. Now, where did that come from? We don't have any record of pharaohs or affluent Egyptians that lived that long, but Joseph was there. I believe Joseph was the one who set that standard. And I believe that you and I can be just like them. You and I can make healthy choices and be lights in the light of temperance to those around us. Moses lived to be 120 years of age. And when he climbed the mountain and looked out with undimmed vision over the promised land, we're told that he laid down and went to sleep. Okay? How many 120-year-olds do you know could climb a mountain and do that? It's possible. It's possible when we walk in the light of temperance. How do I know that? Because the Bible tells me so. In Joshua, his lifestyle, his temperance, the decisions that he would make on a daily basis brought him to the ripe old age of 110. Caleb, we don't know when he died, but we do know he was a contemporary to Joshua. He probably lived around the same amount of years. But we do know one thing about Caleb that probably characterized all of these men, and that is it wasn't just about how long you live. You see, some people say, well, I don't want to live that long because I don't want to be a burden on my family. I don't want to end up in a nursing home having people taking care of me in a debilitated state. Well, if we have that kind of mentality and we make decisions for health or set health habits based on that, thinking, oh, I'm just going to die earlier. I'm going to eat whatever I want. Guess what? We will end up needing to be taken care of in the end. It's only when we walk in the light of temperance that we have a better opportunity of being long-lived and strong-lived as well. You see, Caleb was very strong-lived. At the age of 85, he came to Joshua. This was when they were approaching the promised land. And Caleb said, you know what, Joshua? Remember the giants over there that struck fear in all the hearts of the men that came with us to spy out the land? I want you to give me that mountain over there. I'm going to go conquer it with my tribe. And guess what? Joshua agreed, said, sure, I know you can do it. Caleb said, I'm still as strong as I was that day that Moses sent me. And he was 85 years of age. Can you imagine an 85-year-old requesting the most difficult battle in a war? It's almost unheard of. I've never heard of that. But it happened. And they were victorious because of this long-lived and strong-lived man who chose to walk in the light of temperance, to walk in the light of God's word, to receive the blessing and the gift of temperance and of every other gift that comes as a result of submitting ourselves to God and accepting the power that He gives us to overcome in this world. They also had this admonition in Exodus 15:26, that if you will diligently hearken unto the voice of the Lord your God and do that which is right in his eyes and give ear to his commandments and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you that I put upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord that healeth you. What were those diseases of the Egyptians? Heart disease, cancer, stroke, obesity, diabetes. God has promised. Are we wanting to take hold of that promise? You may think, well, it's not possible, is it? It was possible. Do you remember when the children of Israel left Egypt and they took hold of this corporately as a group? We're told in the book of Psalms 105, verse 37, he brought them forth also with silver and gold, and there was not one feeble person among their tribes. I believe today when we walk in the light of temperance, it could be said of us, there was not one feeble person among us. How many of you want to take hold of that blessing today?